What is the culture at Carolina right now? Greg, I don't think it just applies to the football program, but we'll talk about it in framing of the football program. What is the culture at Carolina right now, in your opinion?
Certainly evolving. And look, we had these conversations almost a year ago of that. There's a chance for this to go really well. There's a chance for it to go really poorly. It's probably going to be somewhere in between. And I think we can all agree it's probably closer to the going very poorly aspect of things. And it got really, really sketchy there, with the Clemson game and thereafter, and kind of the internal dynamics kind of coming to the surface. Um, but I think there's been progress made, and one of the things about the culture part of it is with the ever changing dynamics of the season that we're in with college sports, with NIL and with rev share. We know that North Carolina brought in 70 whatever guys this past year. In order for Belichick's intentions with the culture to stick, and for whatever growth there's been in that area, which I think there has been. I mean, for the most part, later in the year, Carolina played tougher. I don't think they have the talent to be able to capitalize on it necessarily. Certainly, that it looked the way that people wanted them to look against NC State. But against Duke, against Wake, against Cal, against Stanford, you saw some of that toughness. You can kind of see the foundation for what Belichick would like, with better players, with maybe some better options at some of your coaching positions. But you kind of see parts of it. So the guys that you have that were actually important in that, I think Jordan Shipp's an obvious choice there, right? Melcart, Tyler Thompson, some of these guys who had really good years and they were able to step up and to shine and become leaders. Well, in theory, those are the guys that possess what you want within this cultural system. And so that's why I think retention is so very important. Yes, we can talk about the money being spent on the recruiting class that's going to sign the next couple of days. Yes, we can talk about the portal the beginning of January and the pieces that are needed there. But you've got to make sure that the guys that you're proud of, that you think represent the way you want this program to be, you got to make sure those guys stay around if they have eligibility remaining. And so I think that's a critical part of this puzzle. And that needs to be nailed down ASAP. And then once you have those pieces in place, as people come in, whether it's through the recruiting class or through the portal, they kind of have somebody to look at other than the coaching staff to say, oh, okay, this is what expected of us. This is how we need to be doing this and that. And this is how we need to be acting. This is how we need to greet one another. I mean, all these things are very important in terms of building culture. And so I think that's a very important key of it. And there's also the aspect of coaching retention. Now, I understand a lot of people want some changes in the coaching staff, and there will be. But you want a lot of the guys that you have faith in, that you think have done a good job, you want them to stay, because that's an important part of this, not just in the cultural part of things, but also with high school recruiting, as Don knows.
Don, your take on what Greg talked about there, I think it's important.
Yeah, I agree with everything Greg said. And one of my questions is, everybody talked about the bringing in 70 new faces, which is actually I think 73 new faces this past season, I guess now, since it's kind of sort of over. We know that UNC is going to sign roughly. It's probably going to be in the low 40s. The portal class, I mean, we don't know exactly, but there is a chance it's going to be 2030, which is approaching at 70 again. If we're constantly having this turnover, I mean, if you're constantly adding 60 or 70 new bodies to the roster, that's what 2/3 of your roster every year. How can you instill the culture and a lot of the things that Greg was talking about, as far as like knowing how to approach things, knowing to make sure you show up on time for meetings, knowing what the expectations are, all that sort of stuff. How can you instill those things if you have to basically restart most of your roster every single year?
And Greg, therein lies the rub here. And that is why, to your point, and what I've talked about before, is the retention aspect of it. You have to have, I mean, I don't know how, but you have to have 25 guys, 25 to 30 guys that are solid year over year. Because if you're going to sign 40 people, if you're going to sign 30 people in the portal every year, that's all you have space for to keep, you know. And we can talk about roster management here at some point on this. That's going to be insane trying to figure out the numbers. But Greg, how do you do it? How does this coaching staff do it, especially when they're not versed well enough, I think is a big issue in the college aspect of all this.
So I think there's 2 points that we need to make here, and one kind of falls in line with your specific question. The other more pressing concern is that the time runway for this coaching staff has been shortened dramatically. I think it's important that there was some expectation that North Carolina would be competitive this year. Not necessarily that they would be competitive to win the ACC or compete for a college football playoff, but not to be 4-8. Mm-hmm. Maybe be 8-4, and then that's a good stepping stone for next year. I think with how poorly everything has gone, now there's a legitimate question of, okay, what happens if they're not great next year?
Yeah.
I mean, if they go 7-5 next year, is there a chance of pulling the plug? I think probably so. And so the issue becomes, not only do you have all these new kids coming in, not only do you need a lot of new kids coming in from the portal, because you got to completely rebuild your offensive line. You got to completely rebuild your defensive backfield, at least in terms of your starters. Got to get a quarterback that can move the needle. And then there's some other positions that you've got to address. And then you have the retention component. So there's a lot of stuff that has to be done over the next month to make sure you can have a decent team next year. And so when Lombardi talks about, as he sent out that letter at the end of September, I thought the framework and the concept was right. That because they've lost so many guys over the years, because they really kind of arrived late last December, which they did. I mean, that's a legitimate statement. Now, did they handle it the way they needed to? No. But I think there was some self-reflection. And his point in that letter to donors was, okay, so basically what we're going to be doing this year is we're going to sign about 40 players. Essentially, that's going to be 2 recruiting classes in one, which suggests that that's not the number of kids they want to sign every single year. So if you follow that hypothetical along, maybe they sign 40 this week, but then next year, if everything goes according to plan, they only sign 25. And so what's happening is you have all these young players that are coming in, and in a matter of 2 or 3 years, well, now you're not having to sign 40 kids. Now you're not having to go into the portal and get all these kids to fill all these holes. You actually have an established roster where maybe you have 65, 70 kids who actually played for you last year. In theory, that's what you want. The problem is that's 3 or 4 years down the road. And they don't have 3 or 4 years to make this right. And that is the challenge of not only do you have to get your roster correct, you got to get the culture correct. You got to get the schemes correct so that when they kick off in Dublin, Ireland next August, they can be competitive and they can push double-digit wins, because I think that's really what's going to take for them to really feel like, not just them, the coaching staff, but for UNC's administration to say, okay, like it was a really rough start, but now we actually have some traction. Now we can actually see where this thing has some success moving forward.